All right, you're good to go.
Alrighty, thank you so much. So it is Tuesday, June 18th at 7:05. I'm calling to order the Common Council Ordinance Committee regular meeting. We have a full house today. Heather Dunn is with us, Josh Goldstein, Johan Lopez, Melissa Murray, Nora Najowski-Eitner, Jalen Seed, and myself, Lisa Shanahan, Chair of the committee. So all is here. I want to open the meeting by saying happy birthday to Ms. Dunn, who had to out herself because she might be leaving a little bit early, but thank you. Thank you
Happy
for spending
birthday.
some of your birthday with us. We
Happy
so appreciate
birthday.
Birthday.
it. We can open up public comment right now. If there's anybody sitting in public comment world, Brian, if you could invite them to make comments.
Yep. Hold on one second. Tanner, you can lower your hand. Please give your full name and address, and then you can speak, please. Welcome.
Yeah, hi. My name is Tanner Thompson. I live at 16 Hillside Place, number K5 in Norwalk. Am I coming through okay?
Oh, we've lost you, Tanner.
You're still there, Tanner?
Yeah, can you hear
Oh
me?
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, did you get my name and address?
We
Yes.
did.
Great, okay. Hi everybody. Thank you for having me. Thanks for your work on the Ordinance Committee. I want to, in particular, as my comment on the Complete Streets policy, I want to thank in particular the work from Councilmember Goldstein. I know he's put in a lot of time and attention on the Complete Streets policy, and we definitely appreciate it. I took a quick look at the draft that's in there. For those of you who may not have the context, I am the chair of the Bike Walk Commission, and I've been sitting on the steering committee for the Complete Streets project, and I want to call out. I want to thank Councilmember Goldstein for taking the I think the original draft and slimming it down a little bit, and also making the definitions of the Complete Streets Committee members a little bit more concrete. The one other piece of comment that I have is that I'd love to see public transit become a little bit more elevated as a first-class citizen in the Complete Streets policy. For example, the section that talks about the consistent high-quality mobility system, which I think is in section 1-3, section C. If we could, add a little bit more details there about how high-quality transit facilities contribute to a high-quality mobility system. From my perspective, we need the holistic picture needs to include not only walking and biking, but also public transit. And obviously, given the way that the city is structured with the Norwalk Transit District running the service, but not really being part of the city per se, the Complete Streets Ordinance isn't really about the service that is run, but it is about the facilities that exist because they exist either in the street or tie in with the street. And I'm talking about shelters and bus lanes and maybe pull-out pockets for buses to sit in that are all very much part of the street. So I look forward. Josh has offered to have a one-on-one conversation to go more into details, but I want to thank him for his work and make sure also that transit is included as a first-class citizen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanner.
Thank you, Tanner.
Thank you.
Any other commentators?
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? We only have 2 attendees right now. Would anyone else like to speak besides Tanner? I don't think we have any other speakers, Lisa.
Okay, great. Then I will close the public comment section of our meeting. And the next thing to do is the acceptance of the minutes from May 21st. Do I have a motion? Thank you, Ms. Murray, to accept the minutes as filed. Are there any comments, deletions, additions? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting the minutes as filed? Everybody seems to say yes, except for Ms. Dunn. Were you missing at the last meeting? So are you abstaining?
A little bit of the meeting, but not the entire meeting, so.
You'll abstain. Okay, so we have 6 yeses and 1 abstention. So that is great. So moving on to old business, I'm going to move all of these items together, and then Mr. Callahan's going to help us out with this. We're going to discuss and vote on Chapter 69, which is the Norwalk Harbor Article 1, General Regulations 69.2, 69.5, 69.6. Discuss and vote on Chapter 69, Norwalk Harbor Article 3, Norwalk Harbor Management Commission. Those would be sections 69.20, 69.21, 69.22, 69.23, 69.24, and 69.25. We're going to discuss and vote on Chapter 66A, mooring and anchoring, Article 1, Rules and Regulations, 66A 3, 66A 8, 66A 9, 66A 12, 66A 20, and then finally discuss and vote on Chapter 66A, mooring and anchoring, Article 2, permit fees, 66A 26, 66A 27. So I'm going to move all of these for consideration for a public hearing at our next meeting, which I think just determined to be on July 17th. So Darren, I'm turning it over to you about why we are making changes in these sections and the background and any of the changes that you want to go through in particular.
Well, hold on, Lisa, real quick. The next meeting for the ordinance committee is Tuesday, July 16th, just for the record.
Oh, did I say 17? I mean 16. Thank you.
Come on.
Great. So Darren, it's all yours.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to be as brief as possible. Mostly, for the most part, the changes to sections chapter 69 and chapter 66 of the code were technical in nature. So I'm just going to go through the ones that I deemed a bit more substantive. So in Article 1, 69.5, that provision was duplicative of what currently exists in the regulations, which are chapter 66. And that was replaced with a provision that essentially says that the harbor master can be called before the council on a periodic basis and shall on a periodic basis update the council on issues of concern as they relate to the harbor. With respect to chapter 6922A, this is something that we've been actively trying to clean up. Notice of public hearing by publication in newspaper, it eliminated that requirement in that provision. Subsection D of that clarifies that previously the ordinance was very unclear on how
Excuse me,
violations.
Darren. Brian, can you pull it up just a little bit closer so we can read D?
Yeah, it's
Just
going
a
a little
little bit.
slow. Hold on.
Oh, no worries. Go ahead, Darren. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
There
no,
we
no problem. So previously, D, there was some ambiguity on how a violation would be applied to an owner or a manager of a mooring field. A field of moorings of 50 or more, whether a single violation would apply to each vessel in the mooring field or to just as a single violation. And what we did is clarify that a person with a single mooring would be treated the same way as a person with a mooring field. If you have 50 moorings, you have 50 violations. If you have a single mooring, you have one violation. That's the most substantive change there. In chapter 6924, subsection B, all it does is codify what's already required by the general statutes, which is an annual review of the harbor management plan and the process for modifying the plan if updates are needed. The chapter 6925, that really just codifies in a more straightforward manner the authority to establish a fee schedule and the process that you would follow to establish in the same. Subsection A, addressing specifically the initiation of the process by the Harbor Commission and the proper committee of the council to bring that fee schedule modification before. Subsection B is basically codifies that final review and approval of any fee schedule goes before the Common Council, and C addresses the effective date of any fee schedule change. That really brings us through all of chapter 69, so both Article 1 and Article 3 of chapter 69 of the code. Chapter 66A of the code is even more in the mode of technical corrections. I just want to point out that 66A is technically not an ordinance; it's a section of regulations. And again, you'll see in there with respect to, for example, 66A-8, subparagraph A, again, eliminating the notice of publication in a newspaper. This is with respect to mooring permit renewals or notice thereof. 66A-9, particularly subparagraph C, clarifies the city department where all collected permit fees are to be submitted to. Again, just process cleanup. 66A-26, and I know I'm moving fast here, so tell me if anyone wants me to stop and discuss anything. 66A-26 codifies that the fee schedule is directed by the ordinance in chapter 69. So simply just redirects to the ordinance on the issue. Previously, the fee schedule was expressly stated in the regulations, an actual fixed dollar amount, and it consistent with other ordinances. We eliminated that for addressing a fee schedule by adoption, but not actual referencing the specific fees within the codifying the specific fixed fees to make it more flexible. And that really runs us through all of the changes to chapter 66A. Again, everything else, there is a lot of blue line in the document, but again, it's mostly technical in nature, a lot of linguistic changes.
Yep. So thank you. So most of the substantive is when we don't do newspaper publication, we save the city a lot of money because it's very expensive. So we're trying to move into a more modern way of noticing. And then, as you say, like a lot of the other stuff is pretty technical. And of course, like we like to keep fee schedules and things like that change from time to time out of ordinances. So we don't have to bring it to ordinance to make the changes. So it's all pretty straightforward. Do any committee members have any questions of Darren regarding these technical changes? It looks like Ms. Dunn does.
Hi. 66A-12 talks about like transient. That's not the right word. I don't have it in front of me. I was just wondering why 7 days was chosen.
Can you say the site again? It was 66 what?
A-12.
A-12.
I'm pulling it up. Hold on one second so everyone can see it, including Heather, because she said she's looking for it. So hold on one
Yeah,
second.
if you
Are we making
it's
changes
right
to
there,
that?
What?
Have we made changes to 6912? Oh, I guess we did. Okay.
66
Oh,
A
I got it.
right,
Okay.
Heather?
Gotcha. Sorry, I missed
Yep,
this.
yep.
Yep, there I am. I'm good.
Go
I
ahead.
thought it was 69.
66A-12.
days.
That's a section that we didn't change, right?
I don't know.
I don't see the reference to 7.
This is Jessica. This is Jessica Vonashek. So we have two types of moorings. We have seasonal moorings, which are the permits that we put out for the whole seasonal use. And then we have transient moorings, which are the short-term use, which is the 7 days. And so we've limited it to 7 days so that we can encourage the turnover of the transient moorings. We're now managing those moorings through DACWA, which is an online transient mooring management system. And we've been seeing a lot more use of the transient moorings. So that is what the Harbor Management Commission reviewed with us before bringing it here to the Ordinance Committee.
It's
So
highlighted. We found 7. You can see it highlighted in yellow in 66A-12. It just wasn't in the blue line.
Yeah, we did make changes to that.
I was just wondering if that was a typical, when visitors come to Norwalk, that's a typical time frame that somebody wants to stay, because I don't know. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I think it's actually longer than maybe our average stay, but I would need to get data for that. And it's also based on, admittedly, Darren and I are not boaters, so we've been depending a lot on the Harbor Management Commission to tell us their experiences in going to different ports like Northport, for example, or Port Jefferson. And so they've been helping us to understand what those numbers should look like. So we can actually pull the average number, but I do believe it's less than 7.
That's good. Thank you. I also have a question, and I don't, 6923 references the 5 Mile River Commission. I couldn't find anything on the city website about who's on the commission, anything, where
So-
could I find that information?
So to answer your question, I don't know exactly where that is, but 5 Mile is addressed or codified in Article 2. So at least the process for how that board is constituted is there. And I do believe that under the agenda section of on the city's website, there's also a section for the 5 Mile River Commission.
There is a 5 Mile River Commissioner. I happen to know that living in Rowayton, but I don't know more about that.
The reason I'm asking, this is a little bit off of it, but Jessica's on here. Jessica, I think, put together this really nice overview in the Norwalk 101 thing that lists some of the commissions and who they're under and what areas they're under and stuff like that. But I didn't see that under. I don't know what that would probably be under. Is
Yeah.
I don't know what.
No, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
And
Economic. Oh, sorry.
I just feel like there's a lot of commissions that maybe aren't accounted for. I don't know.
This probably is not
So
part
that
of
would be-
this discussion, but we could definitely take that offline and, revert to that. Yep.
Okay.
So if you,
I just wanted to bring to it that it actually exists somewhere else, if that makes sense, right? In the same way that we we'll go on, but referencing some of the other commissions, making sure that we know where those are. So.
going back to the 6912, is that where we were just looking? There are brackets. Do we want, Nora just brought up the fact that she was concerned that there's brackets around the 7 days. Do we care about that? Or is that, I understand it being parenthetical.
Yeah, it should be, the bracket should be removed. That would
Yeah.
denote deletion.
Why don't we make that change? Yeah. Just so that the short-term loose, if we could say comma, not to exceed 7 consecutive days, comma.
I'll make that change if everyone votes on it.
Yeah, first, I'm going to suggest that we, a motion, thank you, Heather, to remove the brackets and add the 2 commas where I suggested. And then we can vote on the whole thing as a package. Yeah, and then we'll just take out the brackets, which are still there.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Jalen. I think Heather made the motion too, so motion's been made, has been seconded. All in favor of making the bracket change? All right, I think that's everybody, so we're good. So now, any other questions or comments for Darren or Jessica before we take this to a vote to take it to public hearing at our next meeting on July 16th? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to take it. Jalen, do you want to make that motion? Thank you. Jalen takes as making the motion to take this, these 4 sections to public hearing at our next meeting. All in favor? That is unanimous. Okay, headed
Thank
forward.
you, Darren, and thank you,
Great.
Jessica.
Yep, head off and have some fun. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for spending your evenings with us. So the next item is to discuss the City of Norwalk Complete Streets Ordinance. And we have both Jim Travers and Garrett with us. And I first of all have to open this whole conversation by saying thank you so much to Josh Goldstein, who has taken this this version of the ordinance through 2 drafts after we got it from the consultants. We've spent a little bit of time with both Garrett and Jim to talk about it. And so tonight we really want to focus in on council member or committee members' questions and concerns. So I guess, Josh, what would you like to do? Would you like to kind of walk through it in a general fashion and then we can drill down into it with any questions that committee members might have?
Sure. So before we get started, I just want to, first of all, thank, Jim and Garrett, but also a lot of you who've given us input now, earlier today after, or, since we put the draft out, but also in the lead up to this draft. Just so we've talked about complete streets a lot from a very sort of 30,000 foot angle. Really, this ordinance, as you can see, it really does a couple things. One, it establishes the policy of the city in terms of, transportation infrastructure, i.e. the complete streets policy of Norwalk. The second is it establishes a design guide, which is the actual nuts and bolts and the technical engineering details of how to do complete streets. Obviously, the design guide isn't in the ordinance, but it establishes the creation of it. It sets the implementation of, who is responsible for actually implementing complete streets, dealing with exemptions and exceptions, and then lastly, accountability and how we are going to keep track of how well we are doing in making our streets complete. So this is a long time coming. I mean, Jim and Garrett, have really been working on complete streets for years now, but this is sort of a policy change in an effort to make Norwalk, more livable, sustainable, and equitable, and very simply with our transportation infrastructure, making sure that people can get where they need to go through multiple options, whether it is biking, walking, cars, or public transit. And so I just wanted to sort of, we talked a lot about a complete streets. I want to first start with
maybe what we ought to do before we get onto the nuts and bolts, should we let Jim and Garrett make any comments about this before we move forward? And we'll get into the details.
Absolutely.
So Jim and Garrett, either one of you, if you have general comments you want to make before we get into the specifics to set the stage for this ordinance.
Hey, Gary, you want to kick off on one, and then and I'll follow up with an end.
Yeah, absolutely. Am I able to just share my screen really quick? I just
Absolutely.
have two slides that I wanted to share with the group. The first one is just really just a visual, just to kind of frame complete streets. I think Josh did a really great job describing complete streets. We're talking about streets just designed for people, whether it's people walking, biking, riding transit, driving vehicles. But one of the things I just wanted to emphasize is none of these parties like congestion, and the only way we can help to reduce or eliminate congestion is provide alternative modes for people to utilize. The complete streets legislation will help us address not only one thing I want to emphasize is not just the curb to curb of our roadways, but also the pedestrian realm adjacent to our roadways, and better help us design and plan and integrate the roadside with whether that be future developments or adjacent land uses. So that's just a really important distinction. Just to highlight, why complete streets and they're so important. It's been identified in our POCD. It was one of the findings of our transportation master plan. Just the traditional approach to roadway design has largely been designed around roadway classification, for which we really just have three right now. So we have our local roads, our collectors, and our arterials. And as you can imagine, roadways and streets are just not a one size fits all model. And you can think about, we have arterials in the city which go through school zones, which go through village centers, neighborhoods, just vibrant commercial areas. So they should be designed really differently. And what this legislation will allow us to do is kind of revisit the roadway classification to more broadly supplement that with typologies for roadways, which there'll be 3 times as many different roadway designs, which will accommodate all of the modes I mentioned before. And it will just allow a lot of flexibility for designers and practitioners to be really context sensitive in their approach, and to make sure that we're meeting the needs of everyone on our streets, everyone that uses our streets. And there's a significant health and equity component to the legislation, and complete streets, and it's really an opportunity to better utilize our existing right of way, and address some of the other needs, some of the environmental concerns, like the amount of impervious surface we have, some of the heat island effect, and to also help build out our urban canopy. There's just so many opportunities, and through a complete streets design guide that will allow us to take a better look at how we can start to address some of those. And then really just the last thing I want to hit upon is safety. Complete Streets is really critical to improving safety on the roadways. If we don't plan and design around all modes, we're going to miss things. And it's going to result in undesirable consequences. From the crash data repository from 2015 to 2019, there were 14 fatalities on Norwalk City streets and over 26,000 crashes, of which 10% resulted in injury. So this is going to give, again, practitioners the tool set, a more robust tool set to start to address some of these safety concerns. And this is Complete Streets is in 2021, Congress directed the federal government, federal highways, to adopt a Complete Streets design model, recognizing its contributions to safety. CONDOT started this process in 2010, and just as late as last year, developed an engineering directive for the planning and design of roadways to make sure we're accommodating all road users. And then there's been 14 other cities and states in Connecticut that have adopted this, but it does really position the city very well for future grant funding, whether that's federal or state funding. I just also want to make the last point I'll make is that the state hasn't reached its targets for reducing vulnerable road users' crashes, whether that's pedestrians and bicyclists, over the past couple of years. So the federal government's made a requirement that the state invest more money into addressing these issues and these crashes on our roadways. So it does position our city well to be competitive for grant funding. And I'll turn it over to Jim if he wants to add any comments, but we're happy to answer questions. And one more thing before I actually turn it over to Jim, I wanted to just share the next slide, which is for our Complete Streets demonstration project. So the timing worked out phenomenally. It couldn't have worked out any better. So hopefully you've seen some of the social media that's gone out over the past week. But this Sunday, we'll be doing an implementation project. We'll be looking for volunteers to roll up their sleeves and paint the intersection of North Main Street and Ann Street to accommodate some pedestrian improvements and amenities. And as part of that event, there'll be some educational and awareness opportunities, but it'll allow people to touch, feel, and really get a hold of Complete Streets in a way that we haven't been able to before. And I think it's a very high visibility location. A lot of people have experienced it. So I think the before and after will be really significant. We're doing things like adding curb extensions. We're adding another crosswalk, and we're even going to signalize it or connect it to the signal. And we're adding, a median refuge for pedestrians. So it will be very transportational, and we'll continue to collect feedback through the demonstration project. So I'll turn it over to Jim now, but we're really excited and hope to see you there.
Yeah, I certainly hope we see you there. I want to bring home one point, and Garrett talked about it before, and he really highlighted this at the end. At its core, this is about safety. Right. For me, this is been about safety so I did this in New Haven when we were nearly on the lower end of fatalities on city streets. Right. But we had enough that it was concerned. Right. We have since 2009, the low point, we have had an 83% increase in fatalities nationwide. In 2022, we surpassed 2021. And we surpassed 2020. Those years, we had the least vehicle miles traveled because we had a pandemic, but we still had the highest amount of pedestrian fatalities. It has risen every single year, and I think why Complete Streets are important is because doing the same thing over and over again doesn't get you a different result. And we need to have Complete Streets to be fluid, to look at things differently, to look at how we can make it better. I'll end with one story. We're doing sidewalks on row 8, and Troy has been on vacation for a couple of days. I am project managing for him. I've had the opportunity to go out there. Met a grandmother who's the babysitter for her grandchild, and she came out to tell me how excited she was about the sidewalks because since her daughter and son-in-law moved into the house, she feels that every time she comes up there that she was a prisoner in that house because she could never leave for fear of walking there, and she is excited to walk her grandson into town. Right? It's the safety component. It's about changing the road to make people feel more comfortable, right? And I think that's what we're going to measure. And that's what we're going to hold ourselves accountable for, right? Delivering safer streets. So I'll turn it back over to you. That was my one point I wanted to bring home.
So Josh?
Yeah,
Lisa,
I mean,
real quick, we just while this was going on, Heather and we lost Heather and we lost
Nora. Her
Nora.
phone. Yep.
We still have a quorum. We still have 5.
Yes.
okay.
We're not voting on
We're
anything.
also not
anymore.
voting on anything right now.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I know. I'm just
Other than to adjourn, which everybody probably will find a way to make that happen.
yeah, I think we can, yeah. Look, Jim and Garrett, I mean, not only have they been putting an incredible amount of work into getting us this far and beyond, but also they're absolutely right. I mean, at its core, this is about safety. This is about making smarter, safer streets, and it is about creating more opportunities for people to get where they need to go and to do so in a timely fashion, and with the hope, that it benefits a lot of different things, including reducing congestion. So there are a lot of positives to take out of this. But I wanted to sort of go through each section of the ordinance.
Oops, Josh is frozen. He'll probably come back in a minute. But Brian, if you could put up the ordinance just so we could take a look at it. Hopefully Josh will unfreeze. There he goes. Yeah, you froze for one quick second there, Josh.
Oh, okay.
So we're putting up the ordinance in that while you were freezing, we were putting the ordinance up.
Got it. Okay. One thing first, though, this is a draft. For those of you who haven't done this before, this is take one. There are going to be some things that require a little more fleshing out and a little discussion. And as we said at the top, we're going to be meeting with a lot of stakeholders. We synthesize those recommendations, and obviously we'll present a subsequent draft to you hopefully next month. So this isn't set in stone, but this is our first sort of big stab at getting this on paper. Because as anyone knows who's ever written an ordinance before, the hardest thing you can face is a blank sheet of paper. So the purpose is exactly what we've talked about. Jim and Garrett summarized it. I know that Johan and some others had some interesting suggested revisions to this. But this is the oeuvre of it is right. I wanted the definitions, each defined term, and this has a lot to do with accessing grant funding and just making sure that there is consistency. These definitions were either definitions worked on or looked at by our consultant, FHI, who helped us with this project, for which I will publicly thank them for their work, or were adopted by either federal agencies or state agencies or by state law. The reason we do that is to make sure there's consistency, so that everyone knows that we're all talking about the same thing. One of the definitions I just want to note, one is priority communities, which are obviously populations or communities of people who have been underserved by transportation or disproportionately negatively impacted. We're really talking about specific groups of people as defined by state statute, who typically have difficulty gaining access to or are not as able to access transportation as easily. They're a specifically cited group by state statute. The other thing I want to note is the safe system approach, which has a lot to do with, as we foreground for when we talk about Vision Zero, a lot of these are terms of art. Does anyone have any questions about the definitions? Okay, then I'm going to move on to section 1-3, which is on page 3. This is our first pass at a complete streets policy. And very simply, none of this language should come as a surprise. The policy is to implement an integrated and connected multimodal transportation system, which is exactly the kind of thing we're talking about, which is, as Garrett showed on the slide, streets and transportation that is accommodating to all different kinds of users, bikers, drivers of cars, and access to public transit. The policy that makes up complete streets should have a number of components. We've included a bunch of them, as you can see in section C. And I also would note, I'm sorry, before in section B about, and there's some syntax errors that I see here that we'll have to just sort of knit and fix, but that we are, that we have the goal of creating convenient travel options and to make sure that we are accommodating to all different kinds and types of motorists. I know that there was a question, I know Jalen has raised this kind of question before about public safety vehicles, and that's something that would be considered along with different kinds of motorists as featured in sort of B here. In C, you can see that what the Complete Streets policy would include, which is basically, I mean, it says it right there, a high quality mobility system, safe and connected. So making sure that it's easy and connected to get from one place to another and that people can do so in different modes and do so safely. A 15-minute city is obviously a aspirational goal of ours, but it's to make it so that anyone can get from one place to another within 15 minutes in more than one area. Jalen, I see that you have a hand up.
Yeah, and not to cut you off. I just thought maybe in B that's where we could add like the public the first responders kind of in there.
Yeah, and
it's part of it.
Jim and
Yep.
Garrett, do you have a comment about having reached out to maybe the first responders? That was a question that Jalen had that we thought we should ask of you, like if this is something that has been tested with those types of users, street users.
Yeah, I can. I'll take a stab at it. So, as part of FHI's scope of the Complete Streets project, they actually included a number of stakeholder meetings, and police, fire, and emergency services were actually the first meeting that we had between FHI, the city, and our emergency responders. And at that meeting, we talked a lot about making sure because emergency response, right, is a really big part of the safe systems approach. You have to get, if there is a crash, you have to get people there to mitigate it as quickly as possible. So, at that meeting, we shared the different design vehicles that for example, the fire department has. So the different size of their trucks and, how they could accommodate and navigate certain radii. So I think with all projects, we'll work through that, and we'll make sure the design guide accommodates, flexibility in design to make sure that we can still get, like, for example, curb extensions at an intersection, but still make sure that we can maintain the throughput of their emergency services.
So that's going to be primarily addressed in the design guide. Is that what you're suggesting? Not so much in the ordinance?
Yeah, I think it will be part of the design guide, and practitioners will utilize that guide, and they'll coordinate with those specific departments to make sure to vet the designs and make sure they work accordingly.
But to Jalen's point, I don't think that I think that we do call out specific modes, and we do make sure that we are building our roads for our first responders. So I don't see that there's a challenge if we want to add first responders or emergency services or that into that. I think it's fine to have that specific call out. I think we, as Garrett talked before, we always take that as a priority, right? That was the first people that we talk to when we do development reviews and we have concerns. We always make sure it runs through there. But having this solidified onto this is in addition to the design guide is not an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I would note, I should have provided a little bit of background, which is this. FHI provided us I think it was about a 27 or 28 page ordinance. For those of you who've ever seen an ordinance before, which is all of you, considering you're on the Ordinance Committee, that's very long. And so a lot of the information that FHI provided is the kind of information that would show up in a design guide. And we have just made it a practice here in Norwalk to take a lot of the technical or more specific components of a policy or a project and put them in a guide, especially when we know that information can change over time and may need to be modified by professionals in the field. The policy, though, the reason why the policy is in the ordinance is because the council has the prerogative and the responsibility to set policy for the city. That's our job. And so we wanted, and we made a strategic choice to make sure that the policy was part of the ordinance when other municipalities have decided to make the policy something that doesn't exist in an ordinance. This was a strategic choice that we thought was to the benefit to make sure that Norwalkers know that this is the policy of the city, you know, assuming this ordinance passes. The elements, and as you can see, sort of the values as espoused in the policy, and that's runs through sort of that 1 bullet point through 8, are obviously they are goals. It's aspirational, but it's saying that when we design streets and make sure that they are complete streets, these values are top of mind, and that they are going to be incorporated in part of every sort of complete streets design. And that includes attempting to stimulate the economic vitality by making sure that people can get and access their jobs easily. It also has to do with making sure that Norwalk has as sustainable a transportation network as possible, and an equitable one as well, making sure that we seek to eliminate historic barriers to transportation access, as has been enumerated in lots of scholarship about people who have been disadvantaged or just have not been able to access transportation, especially in communities like Norwalk, where it's a little harder than, say, like New York City. You know, and the policy is, I mean, we've sort of gone over the basics of the policy, but as you can see, these are sort of the aspirational guidelines and the goals of a complete street. In section D, it discusses a safe system approach, which was a term that was defined above. This is exactly what Jim was talking about in the beginning, and making sure that it's prioritized to eliminate or greatly reduce motor vehicle collisions, pedestrian collisions with pedestrians, and make it so that it is as safe a street as humanly possible. This is also going to help us because we also have been advocates of the Vision Zero policy, but it will help us apply for and receive grants. These sometimes certain verbiage or certain terms of art are really important to have codified in the city code, and it will help us access those kinds of resources so that we can get grants to help us make all of this possible. I want to move on a little bit to the design guide. I'm going to do a brief overview, but I am going to ask Jim and Garrett, who are the engineering experts here, to provide a little more context, because the design guide is a separate document, which is why in the first sentence it says that the city is directed to develop a complete streets design guide. As you can see, the design guide, as Garrett said earlier, is sort of the practical nuts and bolts guide that practitioners are going to use to actually make complete streets. And and I'm going to let Jared and Jim, Garrett and Jim explain exactly what is in the design guide. But for example, what FHI had listed in the original ordinance draft was a number of specific manuals and design guides that practitioners should refer to when doing the actual work of designing a street. We declined to put those in this draft of the ordinance because these things change. Certain manuals are favored, sometimes they get updated. And instead of locking in to an ordinance exactly which manuals or guides or materials practitioners should be using, we decided to put it in a design guide where it can get regularly updated by TMP and other practitioners. As you can see in section B, we are requiring that it be reviewed no less frequently than every 2 years. If there's no changes necessary, then, and that's within the discretion of, it says here, the Complete Streets Coordinator, which, as you'll see in the definitions, is the director of TMP or his or her designee. And there is a process by which, if there is an amendment to the design guide, it will be made public and on file in the city clerk's office. And the public will be given a mechanism for submitting comments. So there is transparency if there are changes to the design guide. Basically, and then you can see in D, I'm going to skip over C just because C has to be written, but it's obvious, which is that we want the Common Council, but that really is the Director of Transportation, Mobility, Parking, and DPW to use the Complete Streets policy and the design guide to support the implementation of complete streets. But in D, we did want to give discretion to the city to use any design standard or guideline which would provide relevant and reliable guidance toward making a complete street. This is because we can't predict or write every single manual, guide, paper, what have you, that will qualify, but we wanted to give the discretion so that if there's a new design standard or guideline, we want to make sure that that's something that city officials from now and in decades from now feel that they can rely on. Jim and Garrett, are there other things about the design guide that may not be necessarily in the ordinance, but something that you want to talk about and just sort of give everyone sort of an idea of what the design guide is?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So the design guide, one of the leading principles of the design guide, kind of goes back to just past practice has really been to look at the design of streets through roadway classifications, which were really just based on the throughput of vehicles, right? So I go back to, historically, this is across all towns and municipalities in the state and across the nation. There's been very limited roadway classifications, and whether that's a local roadway, a collector, and arterial. We just need to make sure that our city has the tools and the capabilities to look at context-sensitive designs to really broaden all the type of different classifications, because no neighborhood and roadway is unique, and allow for a context-sensitive design. So that's exactly what the design guide will do. It will provide tables and checklists for practitioners to make sure that they consider all modes of transportation within every project, and then it will help them make trade-offs. Obviously, there's only so much right of way for every street, and it ranges from 60 feet in the city to down to 20 or maybe even less in some areas. So there's always going to be choices in the trade-offs, but the design guide is there to help practitioners, whether that's city agencies, whether that's the state doing a project in our city, or whether that's a private development, to design the streets in accordance with this policy. I think Josh mentioned that it will reference best practices. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great manuals out there. We just want to make sure that we're collectively utilizing them. And then there's been a lot of new safety-based research over the past decade, really what's proven and what's worked. And, I look at the list, and the design guide will help us, really implement safer speeds on our streets. Speeds are directly correlated to the severity or the energy in their crash, and humans can only withstand so much energy. So it'll help us look at things like that, whether it's just separating users in time and space. So just making sure that there's a sidewalk, like Jim was speaking about, so people feel comfortable, but they're out of the way of moving traffic. Whether we have bike lanes on the roadway, there's tremendous research showing the reduction in bicycle crashes when they have a dedicated space on the side of the road. And it might look different on every road, but that's really what the design guide is there to do.
Anyone have any questions about the design guide before we move on? Okay. 1.5, this is to make this abundantly clear. We use the term complete streets coordinator because this is a kind of term that shows up in a lot of complete streets ordinances, but in the definition section, it makes it very clear that the complete streets coordinator is the director of TMP or his or her designate. That person is the person responsible for not only ensuring compliance with the complete streets policy and design guide, but also making sure that they are going to establish benchmarks and catalog and manage that complete streets is complete streets is implemented, and as the chief person responsible for monitoring and reporting on our compliance. And I mean the city's compliance with this ordinance, and to maintain and update the design guide. That is not, that shouldn't come as a surprise, especially when you look at the definition, but this is to make it abundantly clear. We generally find in ordinances where it's not clearly defined who is responsible, that can turn into just a logistical issue. So we wanted to make sure that that was clear here. Insofar as implementation, again, this is now this is suggesting a major policy change, and that this design guide and all subsequent amendments to that guide, because remember, an ordinance is not just for now, it's for decades from now, and it's in the future in perpetuity, will apply to all improvement and transportation projects. And again, improvement projects and transportation projects are defined terms in this ordinance, so you can go refer to the top and take a look at the definitions. But except as may be excluded, which we'll talk about in a second. B, as you can see, it says that the design guide will be an amendment to the Transportation Master Plan and the POCD. This is something that we would have to do, or we have to do, and it will help us apply for grants and other kinds of funding. Also, considering this is some complete streets is something that was clearly enumerated in the Plan of Conservation and Development, making this an amendment to that just makes a lot of sense. This C here, and I'm going to ask Jim and Garrett to talk a little bit about this regarding the 3-year improvement schedule and map for the city's roadways that advances the complete streets policy. I would mind a little context and explanation, but also this is to make sure that as we're planning street improvements into the future, because how DPW typically does their mapping is in a 3-year phase. This is to make sure that those planned improvements are in accordance with the Complete Streets Policy and Design Guide. But just to make sure that this is adequately explained, and Jim and Garrett, if you guys wanted to just quickly sort of summarize this.
I'll take one hit on this, and that is that we, as along with the consultant, really looked at Smart Growth America as they have really defined a complete streets policy framework, right? And in that they're listed 10 different points. One of them is mandates coordination, right? And that's, I think, what we're really looking to do here. It is about that as a city we coalesce together to come up with, but we're always going to be looking at how we could build a better mousetrap, right? And I think the best solutions come when you have a variety of people that are coming together, that are looking at things and making sure that what is going to get done, are there opportunities that we could get a bike lane in, should the sidewalks be on one side or the other, should they be on both sides, right? Where do we have crossings that need to go, so that we have a number of people looking at not only the form of a road, but the function of a road, and how it goes, how one necessarily doesn't override the other, but that they really go together, right? We need to look at, does the form need to change for the function to be better, right? Do we need to narrow the road? Do we need to expand the road, right? And I think that's what we're really looking here, is that this would be the mandating coordination portion of the complete streets legislation.
I like that. That's a good phrase and a good explanation. Thank you, Jim. 1.7, I want to talk about, so exemptions. This is in almost every single complete streets ordinance, but very simply, sometimes a transportation project shall not be required to meet the complete streets standards if any of the following exemptions, and I realize there's a difference between an exemption and an exception, but these are the exemptions. So if any of these are true, they are not subject to this. There are plenty of examples that could fit within this. I think a highway is a good example. But suffice it to say, there are going to be certain projects that will fall within these 3 categories. And if so, and they're able to sufficiently show that they do fall within, that the following is true insofar as the project, they are not subject to complete streets. Obviously, if there is a component piece of a project that fits within those guidelines, but the rest of it does not, the exemption only applies to the portion that meets the criteria, not the whole thing. So that is something that the Complete Streets Coordinator, i.e. the Director of TMP, will be responsible for adjudicating and working with whomever is responsible for developing the project on, making sure which parts of the project need to be consistent with complete streets and which are not. Any questions about this section before I move on to exceptions? Or Jim and Garrett, anything I missed that you want to add?
No, I think you summarized it well. I'll just add that like C, for example, when there's like really low cost maintenance issues, there's like this ordinance identifies a threshold for what'll trigger complete streets projects and whether there needs to be any enhancements.
Melissa, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, it's not really a question more than it is a comment because I don't have a better wording, but B strikes me as a little clunky. Adhering to the standards would result in exorbitant costs or in facilities that substantially exceed the identified existing or future demand. I guess I'm thinking if you're thinking
Wait, you're looking at the wrong section.
Okay, where am I?
We're talking about 17A. and
Okay.
B.
Okay.
So
We'll get
that's
to
coming
the
up. That's coming up next.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Okay. So exceptions are different from exemptions. An exception is required when a project is either unable to meet a requirement in the design guide or accommodate an identified user. And you can see in B reasonable and appropriate reasons. And I realize this is not an exhaustive list, but it is something that's featured pretty prominently in complete streets ordinances, or policies, this kind of list where appropriate reasons for requiring an exception. And you can see where, like, for example, if applying a standard would result in actually it being adverse to the goals in complete streets, obviously we don't want to do that. Adhering to the standards would result in exorbitant costs or in facilities substantially exceed the identified existing or future demand. A study says that the facility or whatever project it is not appropriate. I mean, you can see that these are reasonable reasons whereby applying complete streets would actually be counterproductive to the goal of complete streets. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is sort of an example of what would be considered appropriate reasons, and you can sort of follow the logic of what would be considered an exception. You can't just claim an exception, though. And one of the things that we worked on, and I think we would like your input on, obviously all of this, but this an exception. So we put in a process by which if a developer, and I'm saying developer in sort of broader terms, but if anyone who seeks an exception has to do so in writing, has to document the reasons for which an exception should be made, and that exception should be made, submitted to the Complete Streets Coordinator. You can see that the Complete Streets Coordinator may approve the exceptions, or approve it with changes that would bring it into compliance, or that grants the exception request. So basically, approve in full, approve in part, or deny. If the project requires an exception, there is sort of a temporal aspect to how long it takes for the Complete Streets Coordinator to review. And if there are especially complex, if the exception is especially complex or requires substantial review, there may be an additional 60 days. And then after that review period concludes, there will be a Complete Streets Committee to review the exception. And it is specifically enumerated who is on this Complete Streets Committee. It's like the Avengers, but for road nerds. The Complete Streets Coordinator, the Chief of Staff, the Chief of Operations and Public Works, the Chief of Economic and Community Development, the ADA Coordinator, Chairperson of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Chairperson of the Bike Walk Commission are the respective designees. So it's not just a list of people who work in City Hall. There are, including some appointed officials, and to evaluate an exception. If they are not able to come to a determination unanimously, then they would have to do so by a vote. You can see also there's language about sort of final design plan submissions. I want to just see, because this is sort of the one big process we have in here regarding exceptions. Does anyone have any questions? I know, Melissa, you had a question about some language regarding exceptions.
Yeah, am I on mute? Oh, no, I'm here. I guess I don't have a better wording for it. It just would result in exorbitant costs or facilities that substantially exceed the identified existing or future demand. And I feel like that's so broad and could be, I mean, it's an application process, like you say, so I guess it would be adjudicated and be able to determine what's considered exorbitant, existing or future, but it's like how far out in the future. It just feels very broad to me.
Well, I mean, look, the idea is they're supposed to be broad, and there's going to be some level of judgment and trust. I mean, when you set standards like this, you're setting sort of a basic framework, and then it's the responsibility of the Complete Streets Coordinator and the Complete Streets Committee to determine whether the exception is meritorious or fits within either one of these four or another reason that would be considered reasonable and appropriate, but or is certainly like in the vein of these. Jim, Garrett, is there anything you wanted to say about what Melissa just brought up?
I think one of them is just really just, the exorbitant cost is, I think we're envisioning, the road is 20 feet, right? And wide. And, so there's two travel lanes, but, there's embankments on both sides, right? So to get, to get where we have a dedicated bike facility would be cost prohibitive, because it would probably, by the time we would have to erode, build retaining walls to elongate or widen the road to accommodate that, that cost of the betterment would exceed that. I think, we continue to do, that's where, the engineering judgment, I think, comes into play. And really what we look at, every project that we look at, we want to be good stewards of people's tax dollars, right? And so we want to we wanted to make sure that, we didn't have, well, you did a complete streets legislation, that means you have to have all this stuff on every road, right? And that we want to accommodate those wherever possible, right? But that we have to, there are topology issues in many communities that are going to prevent, throughout Norwalk, that prevents us. Like it would be very cost prohibitive to blast a lot of ledge away so that we can get a sidewalk on both sides of the road, right? And we're facing that with West Rocks right now, right? So I think those were that, and that if we get it on one side and we do other crossings, can we satisfy the existing demand? I think the future demand really looks at, we know that when we build a better system, that more people use it, right? When we have more connected sidewalks, more people walk. When we have more connected bike lanes, more people bike, right? When we have better transit facilities, more people connect to them. So I think that's what we want to envision. If, is there a need for this? Do we see a future that would justify the expenditure?
And that makes sense. I'm always just concerned when we have exceptions that it gives loopholes for maybe different administrations down the line in the future, sort of ignoring what our original goals were. But I do understand that we have benchmarks and things that we'll be reporting to that we'll talk about later. So, that will kind of keep us on track. So that makes sense. Thank you, Jim.
Well, yeah, and then I think too, I do think we have that then committee that could go that said, well, you said this was an exorbitant cost. We want to really meet back on this. We think that how are you justifying that as an exorbitant cost, right? And I think that's where we could play. There's always the ability for that to go there, right? But I think the intent here is actually to get more of them done, right? And then those exceptions are more the few than the many.
I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, I think that this isn't designed to be an invitation for there to be a lot of exceptions. This is so that there's a process where if there's a situation wherein there's an exception and it needs to be considered, and obviously every exception by this policy will be considered. It's something where there's a group, and it's not just the Complete Streets Coordinator who's making all these decisions. That there's a group of qualified individuals who will be able, both experts in the field, but also people for whom, who are residents. I mean, I look at the P&Z chair, who has to be a resident, as well as the chair of the Bike Walk Commission. So the idea is that there is responsible decision-making regarding these exceptions, but the policy is the policy. I mean, that's one of the goals of this is so that we can make it very clear in our city code what the policy is, and that's what's in this ordinance. The last thing I want to talk about before, sort of everyone sort of weighs in with their thoughts and questions, is in 1.9. So Brian, if you don't mind scooting down a little bit, in progress reporting. Even though TMP does a version of this every year where they do an annual report, this ordinance is going to require the Complete Streets Coordinator to submit an annual presentation and report to the Common Council that identifies the transportation projects and progress made in implementing Complete Streets, i.e. showing their work, showing what has happened in the last year in the city of Norwalk to make Norwalk's streets more complete. And you can see that while that the report will focus on a comprehensive summary of projects, and will also include a list of the exception reports and their outcomes, so that there is public transparency and public knowledge about how rigorously and how the city is staying true to the policy as laid out here, and weighing sort of the projects and decisions that come with it. The requiring an annual report like this is by no means unusual, but it will be helpful in us as the council having, doing our job in our oversight prerogative, which is seeing how is this policy that we're hopefully going to pass actually bearing fruit. And, obviously I hope the answer to that is a resounding yes. So I realize that's sort of a lot of granular stuff to go through. And I know that, everyone's got things to do, but overall, I just want to say, while I've been really honored to have that pen and sort of doing the first draft of this, there have been a lot of people who provided an extraordinary amount of help. And while I know that we are not at the finish line yet, all of your input is definitely welcome and needed. And I look forward to hearing what you guys think.
Thank you, Josh. That was so thorough. We really, really appreciate it. Melissa, it looks like you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Josh, I know Johan agrees with me because we discussed it, is I just really feel like this was a really accessible document for how complicated it is. So I think it's really just really easy for the average citizen to be able to pick up and get a sense and understand. And certainly the detail we've had here makes it more understandable. But this was a great job for a lawyer who's immersed in really technical legal language to make this really readable for a non-lawyer. So I very much appreciate that, Josh. I think you did a really good job on it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Jalen, and then Johan after.
Oh, I didn't realize I pressed it. Sorry. I think I wanted to, but I didn't realize I pressed it. But I think for the community, a lot of people kind of look at this, and I heard like, oh, this is kind of like an attack on cars and motors. But if you read this document and you look at it, that's just not true. It's really in the name, like complete streets, and making sure that the streets are safe for everyone. And when the streets are safer, it actually helps motorists because the insurance rates will go down in the long run and everything like that. And drivers can feel safer when they're driving. So I think this is really a really good initiative, and I think that putting this through ordinance is the smart way to go about it, so that this is something that's a document that's no matter the administration, they have to follow it. And Josh, great job, and Jim and Gary, District A loves you.
Johan.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Just a quick question for Jim and Garrett. Is there really any need to, because I'm looking at the progress report in the section that we just kind of went over. Is there really any need to provide like some sort of like a systematic account of the performance at the conclusion of each project? So like, I know we discussed this earlier with other council, like, so in a sense, almost like a completion report. that will kind of help inform future projects, kind of look at what worked well, what didn't work well, and there's anything that we can identify to improve in the future. Is that something that's not typically or typically used in these sorts of road engagements?
So I think it's a couple of phases, right? One of them is, I think when we talked about the design guide being fluid in order for it to, like when we see pedestrian fatalities raise every single year, we see crashes raised every single year, it means that we need to change something, right? So we should have it at a point where it's fluid, right? And that we can do. But I think collectively as a team, we do look together. We come together. We look at the product at the end. We make adjustments. We learn from it, and we build upon that. To do it at the end of every project, I would be concerned that we would be looking at it early and too soon to be able to make long-term decisions, right? We will soon have a lunch and learn for you guys if you want to do it, where we're going to showcase a crash and traffic data repository system that we have. That is, I think, the longer term solution. Like when we make the investments in the road, and this is what we measure. We measure, we're going to do an investment in the road. We go out there and we measure traffic before, we measure traffic after, right? So the after traffic really has to be behavioral, right? So sometimes we do it before, we do it right after. We don't get those results. The results really happen when you change people's behavior because you change the environment. So you will look at it for a year later. So I think that's what we want to do, is continue to look at those things. And I think we do that, and we're going to show you some of that data, that how we do it, right? But I think if we did it right at the close of our project, I don't know that we would learn enough from it then.
Yeah, thanks a lot, because that was my next question. Do you guys assess the counterfactual in a sense, like what would have happened if, in the absence of of some type of complete streets engagement, would fatalities can considerably increase? Would they remain steady? So, but it seems like that's essentially what you guys are already kind of starting to put together.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what yours is.
Yeah.
And I think to get Jalen's point before, where it's attack on cars, right? And I think if you come to the demonstration project on Sunday, we're actually getting all modes. So, we are affecting transit, right? So we are putting better transit facilities. We're doing economic development. We are looking at a parklet terrace, in a park, in the road. We're painting different space. We're actually creating a new pedestrian crosswalk, but we're also adding, in the whole reconfiguration, looking at it holistically, we're adding parking spaces to the business community that are out there that don't exist today. So everybody is going to get a little something out of this project, which we think is going to be pretty cool to do. But it is not an attack on cars. It's an understanding that we all need to use the roadway. Yes, I don't think we need to use roadway driving at 50 miles an hour. It's our highways, right? We need to use a roadway at a respectful speed that gets you from point A to point B, reduces crashes, looking at, things such as roundabouts that strategic, build of a roundabout. A traditional, signalized intersection has 32 conflict points. When you do a roundabout, you bring that down to 8. Right. So really looking holistically at what our network looks like. And, the roundabout is about cars, right? It's about moving, but it's about also vehicles, being able to navigate, cyclists being able to navigate, pedestrians being able to feel that they're safe in that crossing. Right. So,
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yep.
I'll add a couple of thoughts. I mean, it's a really great question, and I think we're huge proponents of, what gets measured gets managed. I think Jim kind of hit on it. It takes a long time for these capital projects to play out. But one of the things we thought would be valuable is, looking at an annual report that coincides with the report that we're doing today, where we have a section at the very back, which really looks at the safety trends over the, last 5 years, the last decade. I don't see us changing that anytime soon. And I think, moreover, once we adopt this policy, maybe we'll add some criteria to that section and look at, for example, the vulnerable users, road users, in more detail, and how this policy is starting to change the trends that we're seeing in the city.
Excellent. Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Jim.
Nora Nojelski-Eitner, if you'd like to. ask your question?
Thanks, Lisa. I think I just want to clarify and make sure I'm understanding when we talk about the exemptions and the exceptions. And I guess my question really is more about the exceptions. We are not anticipating, or are we? Maybe that the city is going to have to apply to its own board to seek an exception, right? We're not anticipating like that the state would DOT would have to seek an exception from us, right? The exception process would apply primarily to developers who are looking to do things in the right of way or who have sidewalk obligations. Some of the examples that were provided seem to suggest that this process might be applicable to the city or the state, which I'm confused about how that would work legally. So I just wanted to check.
Jim or Garrett, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think the intention was that it applies to all parties, all agencies, really any project affecting the city's right of way. The exceptions are required when a project can't meet the specified design standards within the design guide itself. It allows for a collaborative and an iterative process to reevaluate a project and look at alternative designs. One of the many outcomes of the exception process is a modified design of a project. So we see this as an opportunity to get all the stakeholders in the room and to potentially come up with a better design when maybe at first, the first pass or the initial design wasn't able to achieve our ultimate goals.
And just to follow up on Nora's question, from time to time with having that standard in there, there's times when the state and the city disagree about sidewalks or striping and things like that. I mean, I know we've had that happen in our district. So that helps suggest to DOT that this is our standards and probably, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that might help us with the state to get more of what it is that we'd like to see done rather than their standard operating.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at the end of the day, they are the state's facilities and roadways, but it really sets precedent for what the city's core values are. And I think our ordinance and our design guide has some nuances and some emphasis on sustainability and improvements to the environment, aesthetics. So it helps us have that conversation. And ultimately, many times the state is amenable as long as the design standards are clearly articulated and the expectations are clear from the beginning of a project to incorporate some of those things into the project.
I would just also note, just to tag on, and Garrett or Jim can tell me if I'm wrong in saying this, but the policy and the values espoused here are actually very much in line with the state's own policies and the state's own statutory language, but also policy language from state agencies, most notably CONDOT. So there is sort of a synergy here to the extent, and I wonder, Nora, if this is where you were going, about whether there's anything that could be subject to like preemption or like legal preemption or something. That's something we can certainly look into and make sure we're not, running into an issue like that. But as written, I don't believe we are. But Brian, I think that's something that we can work on together to make sure that we're all set there.
Sure. No
Right.
problem.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even talking about preemption for sale, though I think that's part of it, but just would you please to be told that I'm wrong, but I don't believe that we as a municipality have the right to bind the state to our ordinances. In fact, I know that there's an attorney general's opinion that specifically states the DOT is not bound by municipal zoning. So I have trouble imagining that we have the right to bind them to a complete streets ordinance. So I'm skeptical, and I think it's a question that we would really need to understand. I don't want to be putting something in place that we don't have the power to enforce. And certainly if it's voluntary and we want to encourage them to participate, by all means, but so that's question number one there.
I put it in our list of things. So Nora, it's on our list to double check with council.
But then I also, to push back a little farther on that in relation to our own projects as a municipality, I'm a little bit struggling with the question of exactly how this intersects with budget authority. So, if the BET allocates only, $1 million for the project, and this, exception committee decides that it will only grant an, exception that requires $1.25 million. I don't think that this committee would have the authority to do that if the budget authority is less than that amount. So I'm also just not sure how I understand how this works in that regard.
That wasn't my understanding of how this committee would work in terms of monetary allocation. It was more about programmatic compliance with complete streets. So i.e., is it exception to participating or having their project be subject to complete street guidelines? And that's what the Complete Streets Committee is weighing versus whether a certain dollar amount. But Jim or Garrett, tell me if you are on the same wavelength or not.
So, I think as we expand this, right, our practice of what we do will be incorporated. We want to say, when you're doing the early design of our project, right, when you're planning that project out, in that planning phase, that we should be looking at that. The planning phase comes first, and then the budget comes second, right? And then the actual expenditures of that, come to the end. So I think what we're saying with Complete Streets is that looking at all those things in the very early days, so that when you're putting the plan for this is going to be $1.2 million, right? And it may be where, well, if we didn't do the sidewalks, we could do it for $1 million, right? But so maybe it's not done. So the request is going to be to BET $1.2 million, and it's going to, this is what's going to be incorporated. I also think that I don't anticipate that we will be dramatically changing the budget phase. Like, the money is what the money is, right? Sometimes it's about, instead of going for quantity, right, it's quality, right? Do we have, we're going to spend our $1 million and we're only going to do, road route paving, right? And we've not taken into consideration of a slight widening would get us a bike lane, or it could get us a sidewalk. I think that's what we want to do. So we might do one less road, but that road that we do, or the roads that we do will be, looking at elements that make sure that we serve our entire population, right? Like when we did footpaths, for example, right? Footpaths does not service all the population, right? They're not handicap accessible, right? They are challenging to navigate. So we need to look at the investments in a manner in which that they're going to look at all the users, right? And I think that's what that's what we're doing. But I think the design guide helps us in the initial part of the planning, so that we understand what the budget is that we're going to be asking for, not the reverse.
Other questions, Nora?
No, I'll continue to think on this. It's less the design guide that I'm concerned about. I'm specifically concerned about the, exemption, the exception process, and the, committee convened by, the Complete Streets Committee, and the authority of that committee to make these determinations. So I'll do some more thinking about it. I need to think through how I really think this intersects with what authority these various entities actually have in these various offices. So we'll give it some thought, and we can talk about it further.
So Nora, if I can, on one other thing, and I'm sorry, I'll keep it brief, right? So, for an example, the state, I'll use traffic signals, for example, right? So the state has a standard of galvanized steel mast arms for their traffic signals, right? In the city, we have rewritten our guidelines to say that they are, that they are powder-coated black mast arms through the city, right? So when the state comes in and they say, we're going to replace that traffic signal, they have to replace it to what the standards are because we have documentation that says this is what the city standard are. If I didn't have the documentation, if I had come in and said, you know what, all our mast arms are going to be powder coated black, right? And we had a history of putting powder coated black mast arms in, right? And the state said, I'm going to come in and do this mast arm. If I don't have the documentation, right, the formal documentation that says this is what our city standard is, then they don't have to abide by anything that I've done. They can do their normal steel. And this you see took place at Route 1 at Riverside and New Canaan, where the state put in a mast arm after the city had been adopting black powder coated mast arms. The state came in, put one in, and they put in the galvanized because we didn't have a standard, right? And we didn't have that in that we didn't have that as a documented standard of what it is. So I think it does give us more leverage. Yes, the state is the ultimate overarching authority, but when when municipalities have created standards within their community, the state is more likely to work with you.
Brian, one other thing, just while we're talking about the exception process, I know Nora and I know that we had a discussion about this earlier today, and I thought this was a good thing to bring up, which is making sure that if someone disagrees, say there's a decision on an exception, say an exception is denied, what their legal remedies are, and if they need to exhaust administrative remedies, or can they file in Superior Court. That was something I know that we had talked about, and something we should research to make sure that we are entities people have that their legal rights are properly reflected in the ordinance.
Yeah, we
Right,
sort of
you're talking
highlighted that
about,
for Brian earlier.
So I'm talking about
you're talking about the exceptions, the denial.
I'm talking about the exceptions. So say the Complete Streets Committee decides to deny an exception request.
Yeah.
And say the person seeking the exception request or the entity wants to appeal. What are their legal rights, right? And do they have to go to a hearing officer, or can they just file in court?
Right. What's the process?
What's the process? And
we don't want them
that,
to be denied due process, so we want to make
exactly. So that's what I'm saying is I want to make sure, and I know it's
Yeah.
not delineated here, but for the next draft, we'll just need to flesh out what their due process rights are.
Right. Okay.
I think we highlighted that to Brian when we sent it along too. So it might be in
Yep.
that. We had some questions on that. Melissa, I think you're the next one with your hand up.
Yes. So to the progress and reporting part, I wanted to just briefly, I know it's going to be a while till we have any substantial data point, as Jim was saying, but I think we could do, and I'm thinking this way because I'm in communications and specifically health communications, and we do a lot of communications that say, how do we teach somebody to walk for their heart health? And so I'm kind of thinking, how do we teach somebody to use Complete Streets for their health and safety using maybe the mayor's dashboard? And what can we do sort of near term in that? I talked to Josh a little bit about this today. So, so I thought some easy data we could do is that maybe we could build something into Click and Request. If there's a, for example, the first time I used the bike lanes at Vets Park, I'm not really the most confident biker. So I had to kind of figure out this green, is there an infographic or something we can put on the website that gives some, behavior tips for how to use these. And then also, if someone's confused by a light or something around town, that we put it in a data point that they can put it in Click and Request, and then we can use that data for training and development. So it's not, crash safety data, but it is sort of ongoing data where we can then report, okay, we address this concern, or residents are feeling confused by this corner. And so we've either done some training or we're planning to update that. And using Click and Request for that. So I just wanted to see if that was feasible or a little too far out at this point.
So I think an education component of Complete Streets is critical, right? I when we know that when we look at good road design, we often say the 3 E's or the 4 E's, and I think Garrett and I are big on the 4 E's. And we have the engineering, which we have it covered. We have the enforcement that the police have covered, right? We have the education component, which is equally critical to that. And we have had conversations with the Bike Walk Commission about really taking on proportions of that, to be a strong partner with the city, developing variety of different, programs that create a smart biker, smart walker, smart driver, right? We want to make sure it's holistic, right? And then our fourth E that I think we try to do is really the engagement portion, right? And how do we continually show up at different events? The demonstration project becomes opportunities to learn about them, but we want to do bike rodeos, right? To teach people how to ride a bike and to use a bike lane. And I think the Bike Walk Commission did a really great video that talked about the green bike lanes, right? Or bike boxes, how to use a bike box. So we want to create more of those videos and have that thing, but we do think the education component is a critical component to having a successful complete streets legislation. So all heard, and I think we want more of it, and I think that's also the only way that people understand the value of what we're doing, right? Or the work that we're doing, for them. We have to tell them, right? If we don't ever tell them, then why did we do it, right? What good did it do, right?
And I love everything that the Bike Walk Commission does, and sustainable streets, and I follow all that. I would like to see some of this, and even if it's produced by them, sort of on the mayor's dashboard or on our website, because if you're new to town and you're trying to learn this new system, there's only 14 complete streets cities. You might not know where to look. So your obvious place to look is our website. And then as you get to know the town, you're certainly going to know Bike Walk. But I would love it to be, really accessible on our website if we're able to do that.
Fantastic call out. We will have a proportion of this in our website, definitely, right? As is Complete Streets home, right? But we will also have a conversation with Michelle on how what parts of these could be dissected and put into the mayor's dashboard. I think that's a great call.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Other questions or concerns for this first draft? I mean, there will definitely be second drafts. I mean, I know that some of you might have some wordsmithing you want to do. We don't need to do that tonight. We can do that individually if anybody has things, little nits and gnats. We always like to clean those up. Well, it looks pretty good.
Well,
All right.
thank you guys.
Yeah.
I really appreciate all the feedback. Jim, Garrett, MVPs. Thank you both.
Yeah, thanks to Jim and Garrett for showing up, and Josh, thanks for all the heavy lifting.
I didn't do it. Lisa played a major role, and I mean, it's a team effort.
Team effort, but Josh is holding the pen on this one 100% for sure. So one thing we're going to do before we leave tonight is thank Melissa for her amazing service on this committee. We have so enjoyed having you. You had several amazing comments tonight, as Jim just said about the last one was just great. We're going to miss you so much, and we hope to see you out in the streets supporting our complete streets and all the other things that we do here in Norwalk. So we're going to miss you very, very much, and thank you so much for being part of this important process.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Melissa. It was a pleasure.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It was a
I will
pleasure to work
miss
with all of
you.
you too. I will miss
thank
you
you.
too. You will see me around because I champion this, so I'll be out painting sidewalks next week.
Paint the streets.
hopefully we'll see you
Bring
Sunday.
the husband. Bring the husband.
The husband's
I
coming.
know,
He's
the husband
definitely
bike
there.
rider.
Yes, he's definitely coming. But thank you all for welcoming me, and I love all the work we did together. It was an honor, so thank you.
But we'll miss you. So the final thing you do would be
Move to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Everybody in favor?
Good night,
Great.
everyone. Thank you.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you so much.
Night.
Again,
Melissa,
thank
tell the
you.
husband I said hi and I expect to see him on Sunday. We can go up and drink after.
I
to see
will.
everyone
He can
Sunday.
hear you. He's over there. So,
All right.
thanks.